Hey folks, welcome back. So last time we looked at the Twilight 2000 core rules box set from Free League Publishing. Due to reasons of time and me blabbering on, I decided to save a separate video for this expansion, Urban Operations. Now, one misperception that I had about this expansion, which I wanted to warn you about up front, is that I thought this was kind of optional and that future box sets for Twilight 2K might be independent, but apparently that's not the case. Some people who have the newest expansions, which are already out for pre-order customers, we have the Black Madonna, which is a campaign expansion, and we have Hostile Waters, which is about fighting on the seas, which should be pretty cool. And both of them apparently make substantial references to urban operations rules and such in their content. So if you do want to expand your Twilight 2K game further and look into that campaign or, fighting on naval battles and stuff like that, then having urban operations by your side would be valuable. In that respect, it's well worth looking into, but also in general, it's just a really good expansion. I've had a look through it already. The rules content is very cool. Basically, it offers you a zoomed in combat engine for use in urban battles, which includes, being on different floors of buildings, breaking through walls, setting up defenses and ambushes and all kinds of interesting stuff. It just adds even more to the combat engine of Twilight 2K, which is really cool already and very tactical, as I said in my review before. It adds to the feel of the game by presenting you with very deadly urban combat. It's definitely one of the scarier parts of modern warfare is fighting in the cramped spaces of a modern city, and they carry that feeling across really well here. So we'll quickly take a look at the back and see what's on offer. You can see there's quite a bit of stuff in here. It's a thin, slimline box set, much thinner, about probably half the height of the main box set, since there's not a pack of dice or two rule books, just one rule book in here. So you get a 96-page book with new rules and campaign material. You get a large double-sided full-color city travel map for Krakow and Karlsborg. You get 16 new encounter cards for use in any town or city, not just the two in the box. 10 modular battle maps for urban environments. You get 4 modular battle maps for close quarters combat. You get 4 scenario site battle maps, 2 of which for close combat quarters, it says. I think it should be close quarters combat, but never mind. A large double-sided full-color battle map for the castle in Krakow and Karlsborg Fortress in the 558 by 432mm format that Free League is often using. And finally, 54 tokens for debris, sandbags, floor level indicators, blocks, and breaches. So blocks and breaches, of course, you'll be using when you're blowing holes through walls and stuff inside a building. So quite a lot of stuff in here. And you can see I've already opened up the bits inside here. So here are the encounter cards. Now there's just a few additional ones here, but they're all designed for city-based encounters. What's interesting too is that this expansion accounts for the fact that the city is an active place and moves and does stuff even while you're not moving around and doing stuff. So there are encounters here that are effectively intended for when you're stationary, things might still happen. So for example, you might see a funeral procession going by. You might see, police coming up and asking you questions. You might have pop-up market stalls for encountering various people bartering. There could be gangs or militia or just the citizenry. You could find an unlooted building somehow, which might have some extra cool stuff in it. You might find some drunks ambling down the street, an impromptu checkpoint, stopping everyone who wants to pass down a given road. You might find some local musicians or a street preacher, burning buildings, people engaging in a robbery right in front of your eyes. You got to decide what to do. Maybe a sniper firing at passersby, dying spy lying in an alley. Be interesting. Running into some gangs for shakedowns and stuff, packs of street kids, refugees begging for assistance, and finally protesters. So there's this cool idea that, the city has activity going on whether you choose to engage with some particular activity or not. So just holding up in the city doesn't necessarily mean that you're safe from anything that might come your way, which I quite like. Then we have, of course, the Free League's game catalog, which, is filled with tempting things like the One Ring and Blade Runner and Vaesen and all that good stuff. Then we have our tokens here. So you can see we've got, as they mentioned on the back, we've got some debris tokens, we've got sandbags for setting up barriers, we have ground floor, upper floor, and rooftop tokens to indicate where you are in a given building. And then we've got blocks here and breaches here. So if you have a wall that's blocking your way or a doorway or something, then you will put a block token there. And if you manage to blow through it, then you can use this token to indicate that you've breached that area of the map. And then we have a whole stack load of maps here, as mentioned on the back of the box. So we have these single sheet A4. They're nice, thick, sturdy paper. And you can see we're dealing with now interiors of buildings here with these maps. So we have here, we can see some apartments going on. We've got little stoves, kitchenettes, bathrooms, some bits of blasted out debris. So there's various kind of entry points here where people might run in and try to take you on. There's also doors and obstructions and also stairwells to get you around in different parts of the building, up or down, as you can see. And here we have what looks to be an office building of sorts. We have a conference room. We've got a horrible open plan office. We've got a reception desk, other meeting rooms and stuff, and of course some blasted out ruins as per usual. Here we have what looks to be a cargo port of some kind. So we have various containers. We've got those machines that carry containers around on ports or docks. And then we have the offices here that you could fight in. And again, it's nice that for gameplay purposes that you have these areas that are kind of blasted clear, which give you kind of a point of egress or ingress rather, either way, when you're trying to have interesting battles inside these areas. Then on the flip side here, we've got a church. So we have the main entranceway here where you can see the pews down the middle and the sort of altar and other stuff going on up here. All these locations are described in better detail in the book, so forgive my brevity here and possible wrongness. Here we have a nightclub, actually. You can see there's a bar here with lots of liquors, some bar stools. We've got sort of a dance floor area. There's like lounge bits, bathrooms, all this kind of stuff. Another lounge area, maybe a VIP room, who knows. Pretty cool spot to have an encounter, I think. And here we have, it looks to be a pretty undamaged apartment block. I mean, there's some chaos in the individual rooms. People have obviously fled the fighting, but you can see we've got roughly similar apartment units, a little bit different arrangement of stuff inside. But this gives you a nice idea of like what an apartment complex indoor battle might look like, or, you know, you might have some gangs or militia or other bad guys hold up in here. Perhaps you want to hold up yourself and people are attacking you. Then we have here what seems to be a roundabout heading through some sort of residential area, and this is an exterior view. We're not seeing the inside of the buildings here, but see these buildings have been blasted, so there will be points of ingress there where you can jump in, try and scrounge around, or fight off interlopers who might be doing the same thing. And we have here another exterior map. So the interesting thing about the rules here is that, you know, you're operating on a couple different scales now. So you have, these are kind of the standard battle maps where the hex is, I think, 200 meters or something like that. When you go to these indoor maps, the scale is smaller, so you'll then switch into like a close quarters combat mode with the new rules presented in the book. And here we have what looks to be the exterior of some of the other blocks that we've seen in zoomed in form. So for example, here we see the outside of the church, and there's some blasted areas here. There's a hole in the roof. And here we have another exterior map. Got a big ass hole blasted through here. A couple holes in the roof as well, and one over here. So you got a few different ways to get in. There's a helipad over here. So it's some kind of official facility of some sort. Yeah, here we have a possible residential area. We got some blown out bits of buildings here, lots of debris to hide in. And then we got a nice little green space here with a little bit of cover, which helps to approach if there are people holed up in here, for example. And here we have an interesting bit of parkland. There's a little gazebo there to provide you a bit of protection, although you're kind of in the dead center of lots of line of sight there. And there are lots of areas to hide in if you're trying to storm this area. An interesting shape of road here. So there's a circular kind of walking path, it seems like. Yeah, so if you want to attack a gazebo, that's how you do it. This one I particularly like. It's very dramatic. We've got a crashed airliner just smashed through some buildings. So, you know, lots of horrors to be seen, I imagine, in this wreckage and all the places that it's crushed. But that's Twilight 2K for you. It's not a happy future or alternate present, I guess. Here we have a power plant. There's more about this in the book, so there's some details about what each of the buildings' function is and what you can do in this site as well. And here we have some railway station. So there's some freight cars still tied up here. No obvious actual trains, but just some rolling stock. This building, whatever it was, is completely obliterated, but these are still standing, so there could be some people in there. The railway station could be an important place potentially to protect, particularly if you're a militia or some other gang that's running this area of the city. You probably want to control the points of transport that might be refurbished and used to move goods and money and stuff around. And here we have another slightly bombed out area. We see there's a helipad over here, quite a bit of debris and rubble scattered about. Again, this particular site will be explored more fully in the book itself. Then we get to the bigger maps. So first off, we have some of the larger scenario sites. So we have here a military base type thing. We can see it's been heavily bombed right here, especially. A lot's been destroyed. Also here, and a bit of the barracks here. There appears to be some sort of defensive artillery set up here. Yeah, there's, again, more coverage of how to make this into an interesting encounter or scenario for any city within the book. And here we have a zoomed in version of the power plant. And I believe this is a nuclear power plant, if I'm not mistaken. Apologies for any errors I make before we get to the actual book. There's a lot in there. Then we have another larger scenario map. Yes, it's even bigger. So we'll have to scroll around this one a little bit. So these are the fortresses that were mentioned on the back of the box. So you can see we have these beefy exterior walls that provide quite a lot of cover, and there's a gap between those walls and the interior buildings. Now there are entrances and gateways to get into the fortress, but you can imagine those would be heavily guarded if somebody was taking control of this area. Fortresses like this, so you put up a barrier like that, try to block the ne'er-do-wells from getting in and stealing your stuff. We can see the ruins of what must have been perhaps the old part of the fortress. So yeah, this is pretty cool. It'd be a good climax to kind of taking down an evil gang or mercenary group or whatever that happens to have taken over the fortress and exerted its power on the locals. And here we have the other fortress. This one is a little bit worse for wear. We still have the walls around the outside. You can see some exterior access roads over here with a fair amount of debris. Up here, this part of the fortress, there's some holes in here where you would be able to probably sneak your way through and in. It's a little bit less secure than the other and a little bit more bomb damage. Fighting must have happened in here as there's some buildings that are partially destroyed. So again, really cool place to fight just throughout this box set. And then we have our big map of the two main cities that are looked at in the expansion. So we've got Karlsborg and Krakow. So this here is Krakow, so you can see. Unfortunately, not a place I've been in my life, but I do hope to fix that at some point and visit Poland. I have many good friends and colleagues from Poland through my life in UK academia. It seems like a great place, full of great people. And you've got all these named districts here. You've got all the road layouts. You have the old town here. Now, again, in the book, there'll be a bit more detail about how these maps work, and also there's some additional hex types when we get into these sort of urban areas. So we've got built-up areas, ruins that aren't necessarily in the larger scale map outside of the cities in the initial basic box set. See, some areas are heavily damaged with debris and ruins everywhere. So, if you tried to drive your way through here, you'd be in for some trouble, but there are other ways to get around. But presumably, characters should expect a lot of checkpoints and security from whichever gangs, militias, or remnants of government might remain in the city itself. On the flip side, we have the city of Karlsborg, as you can see here. This map is arranged vertically, but I couldn't possibly show you that. So we're going to look at it this way. Here we have a lot of lake river hexes, so this will be really good for the Hostile Waters expansion, which I am hoping to get fairly soon. These two cities are so different in setup and in size, so Krakow is quite dense. It's inland, completely different from Karlsborg, where we have this sort of thin stretch connecting two areas of the city. So we can see there's obviously an airport runway over here, then we have some various, like possibly a small residential area here, some more bits of livable area there, and a bridge stretching across to this other section of the city as well. And again, we've got a lot of open water area here, so I think this is kind of designed to be used, if you like, with the Hostile Waters expansion as a potential really interesting place to try and build up a base of power or in turn take down somebody else's. So really nice city maps. As usual, they're made from the really nice durable and thick paper Freely uses for all their maps. So a really good job on that. Now we'll take a look at the rule book, which is the main attraction here, of course. It's 96 pages, so it's pretty chunky. Not as big as the rule books in the main set, but that's a good thing. This is on the crunchier end of the Year Zero engine games from Free League. And so this does add a lot of rules, but it also adds some interesting options for storytelling and narrative play. Now, in the table of contents, you can see here, we've got the first part is just about the general state of cities in this post-apocalyptic, post-World War III world, which is really interesting. It talks not just about, what the technical problems are of living in a city at this time, but what it's like as a citizen, who's in control, the collective trauma people have suffered, etc. Then we have rules for the city itself, including the fog of war, dealing with buildings, close quarters combat. Then we have the new encounters, which are discussed in detail, as well as the stationary encounters. And then we got some breakdowns here of city factions. So there's a couple of these for each of the two cities, Karlsborg and Warsaw, and it gives you a nice sort of jumping off point as well to think of other factions that may appear in, if you choose to use another city for your campaign, for example. Then we have the introduction of the plot mechanic. This may seem a little bit strange to people accustomed to D&D or other games where you have a preset plot or adventure path that you might follow. Twilight UK, along with a lot of other games actually in Free League's catalog, like Mutant Year Zero, Forbidden Lands, etc., they are old school style hex crawls where the players really control where they go, what they want to do. You'll give them random encounters, you'll give them challenges along the way, but now now they introduce a way to have sort of longer lasting plots where there'll be conspiracies or things that you need to handle within the city itself, and it gives you several great examples of those. So I won't go into detail so as not to spoil them. Then we have descriptions and diagrams of the different scenario sites, the main ones being the big playground, the church, power plant, and the bunker. And then we have some additional details for the referee on Krakow and Karlsborg themselves. So a lot of information packed in here, but the rule stuff is not actually that bad. It's not too dense, and it does add a lot to the vibe of urban combat. So once again, we got a very dramatic 2-pager of intro art here for the first chapter. We can see this huge electrical cable tower has fallen over. We got a building on fire. We've got an attack helicopter in the distance. We see rubble everywhere. Gives you that definite vibe of a city in conflict. So, what's it like in a city after World War III? Well, they mention here, like many stories, that of the city, any city now begins thus, and then the war came. So, once the war came, things changed completely for the lives of everyone. So, for example, food and water don't get regular deliveries by truck. Taps don't flow. The water could be poisoned, even if they do. Canned food has run out months ago. So, at this point, long after the war, people are subsisting on scraps or whatever they can farm in the irradiated soil. If you're luckier, you live in a city that might have some semblance of emergency supplies and government that could bring you, some ration amount of supplies. But other than that, basically the people who have the resources are those in control. And that ties into the next section, which is law and order. The military is still the most common and effective form of protection for cities, but they have been ground down under attrition, and the societies that controlled them have essentially collapsed. So the function of the military has been heavily affected by that. Soldiers might be behaving as mercenaries, they might be working as raiders, they could be protecting you against those things. They can be, as it says here, they can be very bad, they can be almost good. So it's difficult to tell. Now then, some cities that still have resources, they may have actual police. Now these are typically not trained police officers like they were before. They're basically recruits or volunteers. So they try to do their best typically, but they can often just be basic thugs like everybody else. Police enforce the most important laws only, really. They don't investigate murders. Detectives aren't really a thing anymore. Stolen property is just gone. Just don't even bother. They try to prevent, active conflict, but basically it's a losing battle wherever you go. And when there's no police or soldiers, then invariably you have gangs that control areas. Some can be just groups of local strongmen. Some could be full-on massive gangs with warlords in control. Some are former military who decided to consolidate power in an area, but generally they will offer you some protection in order to keep people loyal in their area, but you'll have to pay them protection money like any organized crime. Within cities, laws will vary, of course, and especially depending on who's available to enforce them. Murder is illegal technically, but rarely investigated, so unless you're actually seen doing it, you'll probably get away with it. Stealing food or medicine is typically punishable by death, even on the spot. Food and water are the most important things in the world now, so stealing them is a high crime. Ownership is basically enforced by weapons, so if you control an area or a thing, you better have the means to protect it. If you betray the security of the city by allowing in marauders or gangs or foreign elements who might seek to steal stuff, then it says you'll be punished by harsh and sometimes inventive means. Soldiers could be banned because some people don't want to have anything to do with the war. So if you're playing ex-military characters who are wandering the wasteland, then they may not even allow you in the city, but they might not be able to stop you depending on your level of firepower. So economics is interesting as well because the whole global economic system has collapsed. There's no point to exchanging money anymore. Most money was instead burned for cooking or for warmth. A few coins had much useful metal in them prior to the war, and they too have been recycled for better things. So most people are basically using the barter system. People trade bullets, cigarettes, valuable metals, favors, sexual favors, all that kind of stuff. Ration cards, these can be very valuable, get you some access to food and water and so forth. If you want to get something to live, you'll need to have something to trade for it, or you'll need to steal it. And some cities still value gold and silver, but that's not guaranteed. Typically, things like food, antibiotics, alcohol, these are going to get you much further than having traditionally valuable things. Some people also find themselves pressed into indentured servitude, which we thought we'd left behind centuries ago, but is back now because human labor is extremely important because everything needs to be scavenged, things need to be protected, and it's very easy to get into debt to some bad people in this world as anarchy is broken out in so many places. There's often a black market as well, typically run by local criminals or some ingenious survivors who just decided to control the black market trade. And it's often really a necessity. I mean, it's the only way you can get access to certain vices and key things like sugar, salt, cigarettes. And scavengers will bring these stuff to the cities and sell them off to make profit. There's a little side note here about citizenship. So if you're considered part of a city, then you might have some sort of rights or entitlement to the rights and goods the city affords people. But if you don't have that stature, if you're an outsider or an interloper in their view, you'd have to sneak your way in or work for the privilege of being a citizen. isn't. Likewise, there are loads of jobs that need to be done, but there's no real form of pay. So typically, if you have usable skills, like maybe you're a mechanic or you can build things, then you'll find food and lodging would come your way, but you won't get any sort of traditional payment. But food and lodging are pretty much all you need. They're more important than anything else. So, and certain skills are not valued anymore, right? Apparently, the last film was made in 1995, so far as anyone knows. Since the war, basically, entertainment doesn't really exist, so those skills are not valuable anymore. Transport, typically, there isn't any. Gas and alcohol aren't really available to power cars very much. When cars are available, they're either run by the military or by some other people in power. The subway is stopped, the trams are broken, the railways are covered in regrown vegetation and not maintained. So basically you have to walk. People do use beasts of burden like donkeys and so forth and pull carts and wagons. Some people saw cars in half or use the beds of former pickup trucks to use as makeshift wagons. Flying is the dream of Icarus once again, as they say, so the sight of planes and helicopters is very rare indeed. Now, politics and power. Once again, power often comes at the point of a gun or due to access to resources, food, water, often both. So cities may have people that are kind of elected to be in control, like a duly elected mayor, or it could be a warlord that claims to be elected but is just not. The sort of veneer of democracy that used to exist is now completely gone, and what we have left is just gross manipulations of power that were always under the surface but are now all that exists. Then there's some discussion about the ruins and radiation that were left behind by the war. Most cities were pretty much destroyed or damaged significantly by the war, at least. Very few cities were untouched. Not all cities were bombed, but quite a few were still suffering, because even if you weren't bombed directly, you'd be cut off from the food and water distribution network, from electricity going down, and the disappearance of general order and the appearance of raiders and marauders. Areas in cities which lie in ruin will get no patrols from the police or any sort of authority figures that remain. Feral children, psychotics, random people lurking around in these areas, festering with rats and disease. That sounds lovely. Of course, there is radiation as well. So if there were bombs dropped, then some areas will be completely avoided by everybody except those who are the most desperate, basically. Lastly, there's an interesting thing here about collective trauma. They describe it in quite personal terms here, so I won't, read it out in case any of you have similar traumas, but if you've been through a war, there's a certain amount of collective PTSD that goes on. I mean, people have to watch as the order and society they were used to has crumbled before them. They have seen people die, they've seen people getting shaken down or beaten up or killed for minor infractions, they've seen warlords taken over, they've seen democracy and social order collapse in general. So it feels like this is really the end of everything that people knew. And there is a bond, though, in this trauma. You'll find that some cities will basically now kind of band together as their own families, a little bastion of some remains of civilization, and they take pride in it. They try to support each other and help each other through that trauma. So human cities are perhaps one of the few places left where you might find that in decent numbers. So there's a flip side to the coin in that trauma aspect. Now we get into the city rules themselves. Again, we have a nice evocative picture here. So we see what looks to be a sort of volunteer combatant and a uniformed soldier storming into a messed up building. We've got old peeling posters and protest signs and stuff on the walls. Very demonstrative of the grim atmosphere of fighting inside a building in this era. First off, we get into some new archetypes, which is exciting. So now that we're in the cities, there's some new sorts of characters that we might find. So if you're using the archetype character generation method, you can be the cop or a criminal, and no cities without a share of both, as they say. So the cop, you may have served or protected or merely served yourself, but one way or another you used to be part of the police force, and maybe you still are in some respects. Whether that matters or not is up to the individual character and to the state of the city that you're in. Your appearance, you might have a badge and a sidearm, you might have your old uniform or a battered trench coat and smoker's teeth if you're a detective type. You could have specialties in things like authority, close quarter specialist, or interrogation. Example moral codes could be, without order we're no better than animals, protecting people is the only nobility left in the world, or authority is just another way to gain personal wealth and influence. You could have big dreams like rebuilding your city's police force, finding the purpose got away just before the bombs fell, or using your skill and authority to run the town. How you met the group could be that you helped get them out of serious trouble. Maybe you were military police and secret police and reassigned to their unit, or maybe you were shot and beaten by looters, but the group saved you. And you start the game with any pistol appropriate for your nationality, D6 reloads, D6 rations of food, D6 rations of clean water. Your key attribute strength, key skills, close combat, range combat, and persuasion, and coolness under fire is a C. So better, a little bit better than the lowest possible. A criminal. So society was never stable. You were always part of the seamy underground of society for many years before the bombs fell, possibly. You could have been a thief, a drug dealer, or a gangster, or a hedge fund manager. I like that they use that as an example of a criminal as well. So you could be somebody who has, in your appearance, jail tattoos, gang colors, maybe a fine sharkskin suit, and 2 missing fingers from a gambling misunderstanding. That's a good one. Your specialties could be killing, lying, or thieving. Your moral code might be that law and order are for the sheep. Take what you want, gotta just do it. It's only a crime if you're poor, otherwise they call it business. Insightful comment, actually. Your big dream could be just to get by on your wits and your moral flexibility, as the book refers to it. You could find the cop to put you away, almost dying in the prison before the war, perhaps, or you could just try to rise to the top of the black market. How you met the group. Maybe they were in a tight spot, you got out of it thanks to the group. Maybe some bad men were about to toss a member of the group off the roof, and for some reason intervened and talked them out of it. Or maybe they needed you to do a job, break into an occupied house, one thing led to another, and now you're all kind of in it together. You'll start with any civilian firearm, D3 reloads, D6 rations of food, D6 rations of water, D6 rounds of ammo for currency, which note the cop doesn't have. Key attribute is still strength. Key skills will be close combat, range combat, and recon rather than persuasion, and your coolness under fire is lower at rank D. So you're more used to slinking around in the shadows than facing bullets flying over your head. And note there's some new specialties here. These can be added to those found in the core rulebook. So if you have one in authority, you can roll command to calm down a rowdy crowd. Close quarter specialist, then the penalty for shooting in close combat is reduced 1 step. So you have no penalties for pistols, carbines, and SMGs, and -1 for other ranged weapons in close quarters. Cryptographer gives +1 bonus to any tech roll involving breaking or creating encrypted messages and codes. Liar gives you a +1 bonus to any persuasion roll when you're lying. And thief gives +1 bonus to recon rolls when picking pockets and tech rolls when picking locks. All right. Now we get into the cool stuff. So this is the new rules for city warfare. So warfare in urban environments is hell. That's how the chapter opens. Distances are short, contact with the enemy is often brief and brutal, and there's a lot of fog of war going on. You might hear people moving around in the building that you're in, but you can't see them. There'll be lots of obstructions. You won't be able to have an overview of the battle as such. So I actually recommend that the referee keeps a copy of the map hidden behind their screen. That way they know where the enemies are, and they're moving in response to what they believe is happening with the player characters, and they can mark enemy kill zones and stuff like that, which are explained in the rules below, or set up ambushes and stuff like that, and the players are not to know because it's hidden behind your screen. So one thing that happens a lot in urban areas is ambushes, which are covered in the player's manual in the core book. The referee can set them up before combat starts and roll recon for the hostiles, and remember to use the bonuses for waylaying and the terrain type, and the referee will mark enemy positions on their map to keep them hidden for the players. Then you can set up kill zones, so basically ambushing forces will start the combat in Overwatch mode, and the hex targeted by the Overwatch will be called the kill zone, and the referee should mark those on the map before the combat starts. So as soon as somebody enters that hex, the ambushing enemy will fire immediately before you have a chance to spot them. You want to try and place a kill zone in the first visible hex where the enemy is expected to appear. If you have your PCs as defenders, they can set up ambushes. You need to make sure as a referee that you don't have the NPCs acting on information they shouldn't have. After a successful ambush, the targets don't automatically spot where the shooters are because we're in an urban environment. We'll be shooting from a window and 3 blocks away for all you know. So you roll an opposed recon roll with the same modifiers as the initial roll, except that all modifiers for darkness are ignored due to muzzle flash. This doesn't count an action for either side. The target gets a +2 modifier due to the loud gunshot unless the shooter used a silent or suppressed weapon. If the attacker wins the opposed roll, they stay hidden and no initiative draw is made. If they wish, the attackers can fire again and then you do another recon roll to stay hidden after that, and so on. Now city movement is generally done very slowly and carefully, so you can do things like hugging walls. You stay close to a house wall and try not to expose your position. If a character token is in a hex that borders or partially intersects a house wall, any enemy firing at you from inside the building immediately loses the benefits of cover and is fully exposed until the next turn. Cover by vehicle. If you have a friendly vehicle in your hex, you can take cover by it, full or partial. Mark the direction of cover normally using the tokens in the basic core set. Any hitter on a location behind cover will hit the vehicle instead. Additionally, you can move with the vehicle when it moves to maintain cover. To make it even harder for you, your enemy can place, or you can place as well, 2 additional types of obstacles. These are sandbags and debris, which we have the tokens for over here. Placing debris or sandbags in a hex will take a shift of work, and then you place a token in the hex in question. They work like the debris terrain type described in the table on page 57 of the player's manual, with the difference being that the sandbags have a standard cover armor level of 4. Now we get into the building stuff. So this is where we need to start worrying about things like who's indoors and who's outdoors. The center of a given hex, which is marked by a dot on the map, if you look closely, every hex has a dot in the center. So if the center dot is inside the building, even if parts of the hex are outside the building, then the hex is considered an indoor hex, the whole hex. Conversely, if the center dot is outside the building, then it's the opposite. The entire hex is outside the building. Ruins are not considered buildings. They're considered hexes with the debris terrain type intersected by brick walls, which are low barriers with armor level 2 around them. Blocked hexes, so these are where we use the blocked and breaching tokens mentioned before. Indoor hexes are either open or blocked. A blocked hex is boarded up or otherwise intentionally obstructed, and you can't move into it until you breached it. So you indicate that with these blocked tokens. The referee can mark blocked tokens on their hidden map, but should always inform players if they're adjacent to a hex that's blocked. Breaching, so once you've blown through a blocked hex, you can use explosives or heavy weapons from adjacent hexes, and you can only use weapons with an explosive effect of blast power D or higher. Shape charges are especially useful for this because they send all the blasts in one direction. If the damage done exceeds the barrier's modified armor level, then the hex is breached and no longer counts as blocked. You can flip the blocked token over to the breach side. When a hex is breached, the explosive effect will affect only the breached hex. In addition, any booby trap or overwatch token in the hex is eliminated, so for these reasons you might want to breach a hex just in case, because if there happens to be a kill zone on the other side, it'll disrupt that overwatch for you, or any booby traps. You can also breach a blocked hex using hard labor, so you need a stamina or tech roll and a shift of time. You can have multiple attempts to do this, but it'll take you a long time. Now, movement. So to move between an outdoor and an open indoor hex requires an extra fast action in addition to the movement itself. The outer walls of a building are high barriers, and individual doors and windows are not shown on the battle maps. Instead, every building is assumed to have windows and doors allowing entry. Indoor terrain. So inside a building, you have the indoor terrain type, but the maximum visibility is typically 0 hexes, so you can't see anything behind the hex you're in, and enemies outside your hex cannot trace the line of sight to you either. That's a change from the rules in the player's handbook once you get inside a building. There is one exception to this rule. If you're in an indoor hex bordering an exterior wall and have taken partial cover against the outside of the building, you have unlimited visibility in this direction, and enemies on the outside can spot you as well. So on the regular battle maps, you can only move 1 hex per fast action indoors, and no mobility roll is allowed to move faster because of walls and doors. So this rule affects even a movement that starts in an outdoor hex and ends indoors. For the sake of simplicity, buildings on the regular battle maps are assumed to have 2 floors, a ground floor and an upper floor. Inside a building, you can use the fast action to move up or down 1 floor, so you need corresponding hexes on 2 different floors, or you can breach through in the same way, but you'll go to the equivalent hex on the next floor up or down. If you move up from the top floor, you'll end up on the rooftop, and it doesn't count as the indoor terrain type, but rather as pavement, so you get a wide field of view, no obstacles to movement, and a bonus for firing from an elevated position, but you're also exposed. Now, for combat, all ranged attacks against a target in the indoor terrain type suffer a -1 penalty. All recon rolls for hiding or sneaking get a +1 modifier. The modifiers for firing in close combat still apply. So for cover, in an indoor terrain hex, you can see cover with armor level 1. It's effective even against ranged attacks from within your own hex, which again is a change from the regular rulebook, so remember that. And it only applies to indoor hexes. Furthermore, the outer walls of a building are generally assumed to have windows in every hex on every floor, so you can always find partial cover toward the outside of the building, typically with armor level 2. When not in partial cover by a window, you're assumed to be in full cover from anyone outside the building, except if you have just fired against someone hugging the wall. As a defender inside a building, it can often be effective to assume overwatch against your own hex, because there's no visibility beyond your own hex. You can also assume overwatch against a target already inside your hex and fire at any time. Overwatch fire against your own hex does not get a negative modifier for firing in close combat, so another change from the player's manual. In an indoor hex, the power of an explosion is compressed, and therefore the blast power is increased 1 step, so that's a dangerous thing, remember that. However, an indoor blast does not continue beyond the detonation hex. Note that firing an explosive weapon at a target in your own hex is not advisable except for breaching. Booby traps, so you can place mines or IEDs as booby traps. This works the same as anti-personnel mines. This works per the rules for anti-personnel mines, but failing the recon roll when entering a booby trap hex will automatically trigger a detonation, even if just a single device is present. To avoid falling victim to booby traps, you can use the breach rule. You can also breach a hex even if it's not blocked. You can still do that if you suspect a booby trap might be somewhere. You can also fire blind. So because indoor visibility is limited, you can fire blind into adjacent hexes through an aperture such as a doorway, hatch, or window. With a non-explosive weapon, you won't hit anyone in the target hex, but you can suppress them. So you roll the attack with only your ammo dice. If you roll 1 or more bullets, all fighters in the target hex must make a coolness under fire roll. The referee should keep the result of these rolls secret, and can even make fake rolls where no enemy is present to maintain the fog of war. I like that little touch there. Using an explosive weapon is very effective when firing blind. You can target an adjacent open indoor hex, and the hex is automatically hit with no risk of deviation. If the target hex is blocked, you can still fire blind into it with non-explosive weapons, but only if the base damage of the weapon exceeds the modified armor level of the hex. Tick Thick smoke will block line of sight even inside a hex. You can, however, fire blind at targets in a smoke-filled hex. If the referee thinks you know the approximate location of your target inside the smoke, you can fire normally, but with a -3 modifier. So here they give you a nice example of some of these rules in action, which is very handy. Then we got the close quarters combat rules. So we've got a greater level of detail. So there are 2 double-sided close quarters battle maps depicting 4 generic individual buildings, those we saw earlier. More will be published in the future, and you can easily make your own. So again, the fact that more will be published in the future indicates this box set will be a handy one to have for future box sets in this game line. So the close quarters maps have a larger scale, roughly 1 to 125 instead of 1 to 500, and there's no hexes, they have sectors instead. So typically a room or hallway, but never larger than 10 meters across, and large halls and hallways are divided into several subsectors indicated by dotted lines on the map. A sector functions in exactly the same way as a hex for all purposes of the combat rules, except when explicitly stated. On the close quarters maps, there are 2 types of indoor terrain, open and cluttered, typically by furniture or machinery. When in doubt, assume the sector is cluttered. Cluttered terrain offers cover, gives a -1 penalty to range attacks against targets in the sector, and a +1 to recon rolls to hide in it. Walls, doors, and windows are marked on these close quarters maps. Intact walls are high barriers that can only be collapsed with a breach or passed through with a door or window. Collapsed walls count as low barriers and can be passed with a mobility roll fast action. Multiple attempts are allowed. Some close quarters maps have small outdoor areas. These function just like indoor sectors except for the effect of explosions. Then you have line of sight. So line of sight is limited to your own sector on a close quarters map with 2 exceptions. So in a larger room or corridor, you have line of sight to the entire room as long as nothing else is preventing visibility like smoke. And if you have taken partial cover by a door, window, or breach, you have line of sight into the adjacent sector. Note that you cannot trace line of sight through a door or window. Then we have a little summary of the indoor terrain types, open and cluttered, and their effects on range attacks, cover, and infiltration. And they give you some tips here as the referee is when to break out the close quarters battle maps. Then we have blocking. So in close quarters combat, you can block individual doors and windows, not entire sectors. So to block a door or window typically takes a stretch of time, and you place the block marker on the aperture to indicate it's been locked or barricaded or otherwise covered up. The referee can mark those on their secret map. You should always inform players about blocked apertures in the sector they are in. As for breaching, you don't breach a sector, but rather specific walls or blocked doors and windows. Only weapons with an explosive effect can be used to breach, and if you succeed with the door or window, you flip the block token over to the breach side. When breaching a wall, floor, or ceiling, place the breach marker where you want. A typical indoor wall, floor, or door has armor level 1. If the barrier is breached, the explosive effect will affect only the sector beyond the breach. Any Overwatch token in that sector is eliminated, as well as any booby traps in the breach door or window, but not elsewhere in the sector. So it can be useful to breach a door or wall to a sector even if the door is not breached, but you obviously need to use ammo to do that. Slow breaching is also available in the zoomed in maps, so you need, again, stamina or tech roll and a stretch of time. To breach a solid wall, you can do this, but you need heavy tools. So with movement, you can move into an adjacent sector as long as there's a door or window connecting the sectors, or if the wall is breached. You cannot roll mobility to move additional sectors. No additional action is required to move through a door or window other than the move itself. When you end your movement, you can place yourself anywhere inside the target sector. You can't move your token outside of your turn unless the rules say otherwise. And the exact position of the token matters because cover extends in a 180-degree arc from your token, and to attack in close combat, your token must be in direct contact with your target. Just like on the hexagonal maps, moving up or down one floor requires a fast action, but you can only do this in an indoor map by means of a staircase or some other opening in the floor or ceiling. If there's no staircase, you need a slow action and a mobility roll to climb upwards. You can also breach a floor or ceiling to create pathways up or down if there's no staircase, or if you want to avoid staircases due to booby trap possibilities. Now in close combat, you need to be in the same sector as your target and in direct contact with the target. This is part of your close combat attack and does not require an action. This has 2 effects. Neither you nor your opponent can perform any slow actions other than close combat attacks. Fast actions can be performed normally. If anyone outside of the engagement shoots at either of you, roll to hit normally, but a random roll is used to determine which one of you is actually hit. So don't want to fire into melee if one of your buddies is in there. Close combat engagement remains until any of the following occurs. You can move away, requiring a retreat action. You can move into an adjacent sector or stay in the same sector. And moving out of a sector with an active enemy doesn't require a retreat action unless you're in close combat. You can also knock your enemy down using the shove attack, push them away from you instead of tripping them to the ground, and you can move them to any location in the sector within a 180-degree arc away from your token. Or if you or your opponent is suppressed or incapacitated, then obviously the close combat is over. You cannot perform a diving blow if you pass through a door, window, or breach when entering your opponent's sector. Again, another change from the player's manual. Range combat. So on close quarters map, you have line of sight to anyone in your own sector unless they're in full cover, and you can fire at them. You don't have line of sight into adjacent sectors through doors, windows, and breaches unless you take partial cover next to them. A ranged attack against a target inside your own sector suffers the penalty for firing in close combat, but you also have a new specialty that can reduce that penalty. If the sector is cluttered, you suffer a further -1 modifier. On close quarter maps, you can take cover inside a cluttered sector or by door, window, or breach. As usual, that's fast action. Place your token in an appropriate spot, and if you're taking cover by a door, window, or other aperture, then move your token next to the aperture and place a cover token. Partial full in the direction of the adjacent sector. In partial cover, you have line of sight to the adjacent sector, but enemies in that sector also have line of sight to you. In full cover, you can only fire blind. So blind fire, you basically roll your ammo dice again, as we saw before, and one or more bullets mean all fighters in the target hex must make a coolness under fire roll. And again, the referee should keep that secret and can make favorite rolls if you want to just keep the fog of war going. If the base damage of your weapon is higher than the modified armor level of the wall, you can fire blind through the wall without even needing an aperture. Accurately represents the piercing power of modern weaponry, which is pretty cool. Then you put Overwatch on, but on a close quarters map, you can only do Overwatch against an aperture, like a door, window, or breach. The moment an enemy appears in the aperture, you can fire, or a specific character. You can fire at that enemy at any moment until your next turn. Thick smoke blocks line of sight even inside a sector, but you can still fire blind at them. If the referee thinks you probably know roughly where they are, you can fire with a -3 modifier. Heavy weapons, you aim for a sector or a specific target. If you aim at a sector, you automatically hit it. If you attack a specific target and miss, the explosion will still occur in the target sector. Note, you'll only want to use a heavy weapon generally when firing into an adjacent sector from your own for that reason. You can fire blind. You can't hit a specific target, but you'll affect everything in the sector. Or you can fire at walls to breach the wall. If the wall is breached, the explosive effect will affect the adjacent sector instead of your own. They have some general stuff about explosions. So the blast power of an explosion in an indoor sector is increased 1 step to a maximum of A. The blast does not continue beyond the detonation sector, except in the case of large rooms or corridors divided into several subsectors in which the blast power is reduced 1 step for each subsector away from the blast. Then we have booby traps. So on a close quarters map, you place them in a specific location, typically a door or window, but it could be a staircase. This works the same as the rules for anti-personnel mines, but failing the recon roll when passing the booby trap will automatically trigger a detonation, and the referee should mark these in secret if the enemy has booby traps placed, of course. And there you go. There's an excellent example here that covers pretty much all of those different aspects, which is really nice and gives you a diagram as well, so you know what's going on. Then we get into rules about city travel. City travel is slower than traveling in the open field, and there's more detail. City maps are only meant to be used for travel within key city areas. Otherwise, you use the normal travel rules. So in the city maps, you have 200-meter hexagons to regulate movement. It works similarly to long-range travel as per Chapter 6 in the Player's Manual, but is tracked per stretch, so 5 to 10 minutes instead of shifts. In each stretch, you can move a set number of hexes and you might have an encounter. So there's a new terrain type called Built Up for urban environments that are not yet in ruins. For the purposes of the game, it works just like ruins, but when driving off-road, the vehicles listed on-road travel speed is used instead of the off-road speed. During city travel, you need to decide your task for the stretch. Just like for long-range travel, most tasks will be unavailable as they take a longer time to complete. The only tasks you can perform in a stretch of city travel are marching, driving, keeping watch, and they outline those here. So in a stretch, you can march 2 200-meter city hexes on a road or in open terrain, or 1 city hex off-road or any terrain except open. You don't need to roll for the effects of weather or darkness, as distances are short. Also, no need for a forced march. You can march for as many stretches as you like, up to potentially 50 stretches per shift, but few city travels will be that long. You can also drive, but you travel the indicated number of 200-meter city hexes per stretch, instead of 10 kilometers travel hexes per shift. The effects of terrain and night driving are the same as indicated in the Player's Manual, but you don't need to roll for mishaps. Fuel consumption is calculated normally, but divided by 50 to get liters per city hex. The rules for keeping watch are the same as in the Player's Manual, and then there's some information about how encounters work later on. When backing off from an encounter after a successful recon roll on a city map, you need to immediately move out the hex with your next move, or you'll be spotted. You can either go directly backwards or to either of the hexes to your back, left, and right. If you have no movement left to stretch, you must back out of the hex with your first move in the next stretch. They talk about checkpoints, so most cities have checkpoints positioned in specific hexes, and they'll be set encounters basically. Your PCs might be aware of some of them, but not all of them. Recon roll to spot a checkpoint before it spots you. If you concede, you can back off before they come after you. And then they give you a nice example here of how to calculate all these things. There's also a note here about long-range city combat, so these maps are detailed enough to be used for things like long-range artillery and stuff like that. They give some recommendations on how to deal with that, but basically more detailed rules for long-range combat and mass battles will be included in future expansion, so I'm looking forward to that as well. Now we get into urban encounters. So the rules are, there's a lot going on in those rules, some exceptions to the main rules, but they all follow pretty sensible ideas. I think, the way that cover and sectors work in close quarters combat makes sense. The partial cover and full cover rules for apertures and for indoor and outdoor hexes works well. Yeah, obviously it gives you a whole new way, a new level of tension, because when you're indoors, you have such limited visibility. You've got to worry about booby traps around every corner. You've got to blow through doors, all that kind of stuff. Now we've got our urban encounters. So again, I won't spoil these in particular, but from the cards, there are 16 new encounters that you can add to the encounter deck. So since city travel is managed by stretches instead of shifts, and cities are much more densely populated, you'll typically draw 1 urban encounter per stretch. Depending on the flow of the game, it could be more or less. All urban environments are considered on-road for the purpose of encounters. So encounters listed as only occurring off-road will not occur in a city. Finally, you need to do the successful recon roll to back out of a hex if you want to back out from an encounter. And there are 16 new encounters. Suggested factions are included for some of them. And a new concept for encounters here is that they have areas of control. If an area is under no control specifically of someone, then you draw encounters in the area normally. If some hex is under limited control of some faction controlling the area, then you replace the military faction on the card, US, Soviet, or local, with the faction controlling that area of the city. If it's in total control, then when drawing an encounter, replace any marauder or military faction with the faction controlling the area. Areas of control are not static, they can change over time, and that's left to the referee's discretion. So in particular, when you're thinking about longer term plots, which we get to later in the book, that can become important. Ubiquitous feature in post-war times is the checkpoint. So they function like encounters, but they're static, they're not random. On the 2 sample referee city maps of Krakow and Karlsborg at the back of the book, there are checkpoints marked there that you can use. The staff and gear at the checkpoints are then detailed in the appendix. For other cities, you can design your own checkpoints. You can also use the certain counters as kind of the basis for a checkpoint, which they note here. Stationary players. So again, this is something I mentioned earlier that I like about this box set, is that even if the PCs remain stationary, then they might still draw attention from the locals and things might happen. There are certain encounters that'll be happening because there's lots going on in an urban area. So you roll in the expanded list of stationary encounters on page 32, and you can roll as often as you like. We recommend doing so at least once per day, and add +1 to the roll for each subsequent day in which the PCs stay in the same place. So just like the new city travel encounters, several of the stationary encounters offer suggestions on how to connect them to plots. So using stationary encounters, you have a quick and easy way to draw the players into the nefarious plots and schemes within the city. So that's cool. Then we got details of typical NPCs, gang members, street kids, and police officers. Then your list of encounters, which I'll quickly skip through so as to not spoil them. And then stationary encounters, which again, they just recap the rules here. PCs have access to a radio set and they spend a shift monitoring it. They might pick up transmissions, which could lead to some information as per the table on page 33. And cities often are hubs of gossip, so people might hear wild rumors, conspiracy theories, rivalries, and occasional genuine intel as well. Anytime the PCs find themselves with more than a few people, they might hear a rumor. So here we have a table for stationary encounters. We have a radio chatter table, and then we have a rumor table as well. And some of these tie into plots that are detailed later in the book. Now we have info about city factions. Another beautiful 2-pager here. We've got a bedraggled armored personnel carrier, it looks like some kind. We've got 8 wheels. We've got a skull on the front, which is scary, along with a religious bit of statuary, which is quite interesting. And yeah, the ground looks like a muddy waste mess, so not lovely. Again, there are 4 new factions detailed here. I'm just going to sort of very briefly talk about them. So we have the Vorovsky Mir. They're a criminal syndicate involved in the election year and Spear of Destiny plots, potentially. They have some irregular forces. They're basically the Red Mafia, essentially. And they have the key NPC here for that. We have the WHO, a civilian group. We know who they are by now, obviously, the World Health Organization. Additionally, now there is a plot around the WHO in this expansion, which I won't spoil, but the WHO plays a role, and they believe that potentially something bad might be going down in Europe. Hint, hint. They do have mercenaries to protect their stuff, but they're primarily composed of doctors and medics, and they have a couple of APCs, armed personnel carriers, to make sure that they can get their stuff to areas without too much risk of destruction or vandalism or marauding or scavenging from other people. Then we got the Free Polish 6th Brigade. So this is linked to Krakow specifically. It was formed out of the wreckage of Poland during the war, and a shattered collection of partial battalions sort of banded together into this new Free Polish 6th Brigade. And they have an eclectic range of forces and quite a lot of people reporting to them. So 3,000 soldiers, 250 mercenaries from former NATO units, some main battle tanks, loads of battle vehicles, horses, trucks, cars, and other transports. Then we got the Life Regiment Hussars. So they're linked to Karlsborg, but they can be used as a template, just the same as the Free Polish Brigade. They're one of the world's oldest military units, and over the course of the 20th century, they were transformed into a regiment focusing on training ranger units and intelligence officers. Basically, they're kind of like Swedish special forces. So relatively few of them, but basically they want to try and reassert control. Only 500 soldiers, 12 vehicles, but nevertheless they want to gather good intelligence and reinstitute some kind of order in their home city. Then we got urban plots. So again, I'm going to skip most of this just to give you a basic idea, but you got the Spear of Destiny, which is themed around rumors of a holy artifact, and various different factions might be interested in that. And then they've got some countdown bullet points here. So basically, these are related events that can occur during play, drawing the PCs in and escalating the plot toward a final confrontation. They should occur in the order listed, but you can modify them to fit your campaign, and the frequency of these events is entirely up to you. So this is like a skeleton for a full campaign based on this plot line. And we got a key NPC connected with that plot. Then we have the power play. So So this uses the power plant scenario site, and a group of people created a sanctuary movement settlement at an old nuclear power plant. So they're trying to provide electricity and help from this location. And then we have various countdown effects and other people obviously trying to get involved or take over or disrupt this. We have the last offensive. So the war is over, but the war is never over. Somewhere out there right now, one side plots a final offensive, and various factions could be involved, military or intelligence divisions from either the NATO or the Soviet side. And we've got a countdown associated with that, and a key NPC example as well. Then we have the plague. So this is obviously intended for the WHO, and scenario sites can include the bunker or the big playground. Maybe there's some kind of outbreak or rumors of an outbreak, and the WHO has to step in and do something about it. We have an election year, so this is a succession crisis. It's described here and designed for the city of Krakow, but it could be used as a template for any city. So basically, the mayor of the city dies. There's an heir apparent, but politicians divide along old opposing views, and now, of course, things are a lot different in terms of the law and order and society within the city since the war. So things get a lot more complicated. We're trying to become mayor in a situation like that. And we have a couple of sample NPCs here. Then we have the man who would be king. So this could involve a number of different factions and is connected to the town of Karlsborg. This is about a aristocrat who now is not so aristocratic after the destruction of most of society, but is still held with some respect. The Life Regiment Hussars will protect him and try to use him to create some sort of order out of the chaos. Note the countdown events are pretty complex here, so this would be quite an interesting plot, I suspect. And here is the man who would be king, as well as the Crown Prince Gottfried. And we have Operation Reset. This plot posits that Operation Reset was something much more than the NATO military offensive in the spring of 2000. That was just the beginning of a massive undertaking to restore the world. Now, this is a short plot designed for this box set with a couple of key NPCs, but they note here, interestingly, that concludes Operation Reset for this module. The plot will continue in the future expansion of Hostile Waters, which is out now, and Operation Reset. So it's cool that they've got these plot lines that they're laying down. They'll be picked up further in subsequent expansions. Now we get to the scenario sites. Most of this should be for the referee's eyes only, so I'll just give you a taster. Each scenario site has a lot of info on these situations that are happening there, as well as countdown events to make them more exciting. And what we've got here is fully labeled versions of those maps for the referee's use. Details of those locations and details of connected NPCs to the plot related to that scenario site. And they go on quite a bit, and there's also some specific potential events that could occur at that scenario site. Then we have the church, which we saw earlier. Again, it's all nicely labeled here. There's some rumors to be found there. Of course, a bunch of countdown events and the situation, what happens on arrival, details of each location, and of course your key NPCs. So each of the scenario sites is described in this rough format. Then we have the power plant. There's a nuclear power plant, so I was right about that. There's various rumors about it, who controls it, how functional it is, all that kind of stuff. And there's some countdown events here to give you a plot framework to work with to make this an exciting, potentially multi-session adventure here to take control of this power plant or do whatever you need to do with it. And here we have a labeled version of this larger scenario site. There's a main containment building, as you can see. Then we have the various NPCs connected to this power plant and some possible events. And then we have the bunker. This is a lone boxy sentinel on a field of debris where bombs found their targets. So most people are here to have fun, hook up, drink, and generally forget the horrors outside the walls. And it's run by a war criminal from the Balkans. So that makes things a little more interesting. And then we have a bunch of interesting countdown events to go with that. And this is the nightclub map, basically, that we saw before. So it's kind of retaining its original function in the post-apocalyptic world here, but it's gotten a lot more gritty and a bit more scary due to the fact that it's run by a war criminal. And lots of other people are vying for control of it, it seems like. Then we got a number of NPCs connected to it, of course. Descriptions of each area within the club and some possible events that could happen. And then we have our appendices about the two main cities. Here we have Krakow, info about its history, some local rumors, the current situation, the inhabitants, different neighborhoods. Again, I'm skipping through this quickly so as not to spoil anything. Key locations, including checkpoints. And here we have a labeled version of the map with checkpoints laid out. And then we have the map of Wawel Castle, which is in Krakow. We saw that map earlier. And Appendix 2 is the same again, but for Karlsborg. So we have history, current situation, rumors table, what's going on with the city in general, its inhabitants. Key locations are described, including checkpoints. And then we have some key NPCs. And then we have an annotated map of Karlsborg, including some checkpoints and key locations. And then we have the Karlsborg Fortress scenario site as well, which again is fully labeled here. And that's it. So that is Urban Operations. I think this is a really, really good expansion. It's got everything you want from an expansion for a tactical role-playing game like Twilight Twilight 2K. You've got a ton of new things to explore. You've got a whole new type of combat to enjoy, which is urban combat. You give you 2 great cities to start with that are very different in their layout and style with different factions in them. You've got all these excellent combat maps. So you've got the 2 larger scenario sites here. And then you have, 4 larger scenario sites, these ones as well, with the power plant. And then you have these various indoor and close quarters maps on these sides, and you've got outdoor maps as well. So in general, it adds a lot to the game, and definitely you can see already from what I showed you that there are definitely going to be connections to Hostile Waters, which they've mentioned several times, and also future expansions for the game as well. So if you're looking to further your Twilight 2K experience and to be ready for Hostile Waters and future expansions, then I would definitely recommend picking this up. It's quite affordable. This generally costs from a typical retailer about £23, £22, something like that here in the UK, which is very reasonable. It's all high quality content as per usual. If you buy it direct from Free League, it'll be a little bit more expensive, but you will get free PDFs as well. And if you buy a bunch of things at once, they give you a bundle discount, which usually wipes out the cost of shipping. So bear that in mind. So there you go. That's my quick look at urban operations. I would say if you like Twilight 2K, at some point you're going to want to buy this because, whether you like it or not, at some point your player is going to say, you know what, I've had enough of wandering through the wasteland. Let's go into a city where they have stuff and people, and let's see what the hell's going on. And you're going to need to give them some cool experiences. And this box gives you all that and more. Rumors, events, scenario sites, factions, plot hooks, campaign outlines. What more could you ask for, really? So, given the price, given the value proposition, I give this a definite recommendation if you like the Twilight 2K game, and I certainly do. And I'm very glad I bought it, having found out that now the next 2 expansions are definitely making reference to urban operations and make use of the new rules for close quarters fighting. And the new maps and rules for close quarters fighting are very sensible and sort of intuitive and very well laid out because they just give you what you need to know and where it conflicts with the rules from the core set. So it's pretty easy to absorb and understand. So this gets my highest recommendation, really, if you like Twilight 2K. And yeah, so if you like Twilight 2K and you're looking to keep going with it, you want some more variety and some terrifying urban combat, this is your boy right here. So I hope you enjoyed that review. I'm really looking forward to getting this expansion to the table. The main core set has tons to occupy you, but at some point the players will want to go to a city. I know that, and so I'm glad I've got this here to do that. I also do plan to pick up Hostile Waters and Black Madonna as soon as I have enough cash available for that. When I do get those, of course, you can expect the review at some point from me once I've had a chance to get familiar with them. In the meantime, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit like and subscribe and click the bell and all the usual stuff. It helps keep me motivated, and I really want to get to 1,000 subscribers. That's my personal life goal for the moment, so any help with that would be appreciated. And also, if you feel like contributing to the channel and helping me defray the enormous cost of the amount of RPG stuff I buy, please click on the Ko-fi link down below. I do have a day job. I do have money to buy things, but I do also try and cater to what you guys want. So if you want to help me do that, then any donation is, of course, welcome. So thank you very much for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and look forward to seeing you in the comments down below and in the next video. So take care, and until then, bye-bye.